Life happens to all of us.
She's an expert in the field of publishing, and now she's sharing her story with us.
I shouldn't have had to be at the point where I had to choose and just ultimately quit everything.
Paige Dungan, leading book publicist and host, talks true connection.
That's what we need to be doing more of for each other, Courtney, is lifting each other up.
Vulnerability.
What happens if your one story could change one life?
And letting go.
Surrendering just literally takes this weight off and opens you up to anything that might come in.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Myers. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Myers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Myers starts now. Hi, Paige. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Myers. I'm so excited to talk to you today in this way. I know we've spoken before, but this is exciting to kind of have a conversation all around some stuff that we both really are passionate about, coming within, telling our stories, and sharing that with the world. So welcome.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm so excited to be here. I just love your energy. You and I connected recently, a little while back, and it's been such a great time in getting to know you and really looking forward to getting to know your audience too.
Yes, and you are building just a really, really great platform to help authors and people really get their voice into the world. And that's a lot of what we do here. And that's a lot about what this podcast is coming back to your authentic self and getting to know who you truly are within. And I talk about this a lot. Telling our stories is how we connect. You help people do this on a big scale. Like, what do you see when it comes to that? I want to talk to you about like that vulnerability and why that means so much with really getting true connections in life.
It's so true. I say the best form of therapy is writing a book, because when you are writing a book or just writing your story in general, it taps into every side of your brain and memory possible, and it automatically makes you bring the walls down. And I think that is a very beautiful thing, because so many of us have a hard time being vulnerable and just being our authentic selves. But there is power when you have a pen or you're typing your story, that automatically you feel in a safe space and being able to share some of the truest things that you would never verbally say to anybody. And so that is what I love about books, and I love just about writing in general, is because it's one of the safest places that we can find our truest selves.
But that is true. It is true. And I think we can find ourselves and really be safe on the page. But then to share it with others, that's a little bit harder. That takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of guts. Like, how do you find that courage to step into that and just kind of like reveal? I mean, it's like standing naked in front of an audience, you know? It's like you're revealing your soul to others. Like, how do you find that courage?
You are. And what I always tell everybody, and because whether you're talking on TV to a reporter or you're talking to a friend, just go in with a mindset of what happens if your one story could change one life. You have the opportunity to have somebody else feel seen and heard without even knowing it. You have the chance to be able to make a change and different in someone's life just by sharing what you have gone through. And that brings a little bit more security and safety and almost an excitement to want to share your story, because I promise you, there are hundreds of people that have gone through similar situations and similar circumstances. And there is power in knowing that you're part of a community, even if you don't physically know all those people in your life. And the second part to sharing is you just have to know where you have been and what you have done is not where you're going and who you will become. And so not letting those past thoughts trigger where you're going, and knowing that and sharing your story, it's part of moving forward, and it's part of being able to grow and develop into the person you're becoming. And there's power in that. And it is scary. I mean, nowadays, unfortunately, we live in a world that everybody has something to say about everything. But if you have the confidence in knowing where you are headed and being so aligned to your goals and your message, then you don't even let any of those naysayers come towards you, and you really let them reflect off of you.
Well, I mean, I think you're talking about really coming from a place of service. If you're going to write, if you're going to tap
It
into
is.
who you are, you're doing it really as self-serving as it is to let those words flow and to get to know who you are and to tap in authentically to yourself. You're
Mm-hmm.
actually really doing it in a way to help others so people don't feel alone, because so many of us really do feel like we are alone in any situation. And I promise you, anyone, we are not.
No, we are not alone. And all of us go through that. And that is no matter what profession, what background, where you are in life, we all have those days that we feel very lonely. However, what can really help us build those communities around us is by sharing our stories, because there have been things that I have gone through in life, especially as a mom with postpartum, that I've openly shared about.
Mm.
And this is just an example. By me sharing the darkest of dark days that I've ever gone through, I found such an amazing support group of individuals I would have never found had I not been vulnerable to share my story. It's
Mm.
that understanding of, like you said, it's serving others, but also serving yourself in getting what you need to work through some of the, whether it's trauma or pain or whatever you've been through. You won't be able to know the people you need to know to help move through that until you do share your story. And so, as as a mom to a mom, that was the minute I stopped trying to run from it, I just embraced it and let it be a part of me and not let it be a scarlet letter on me. That's when everything shifted in my mindset and let me just break down those walls to be able to just give and hope that it did help someone else in those shoes.
I mean, that is so brilliant, because as you're talking about it, all I could think of is the shame that comes from hiding these things about ourselves, from not getting
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable. Like, do you really want to feel those feelings of shame or guilt or embarrassment or whatever that is, or are you willing to take the courage to feel a little bit vulnerable and tell your story so that someone else might see you, not only help them, but you might feel seen and like you are supportive? I mean, the fact that you're talking right now about postpartum, I actually didn't know we were going to talk about that, but like, once again, here is another conversation I'm having with a very successful, brilliant woman who dealt
Mm.
with a very big issue that I cannot shut my mind to. I can't stop having this conversation. And I don't know if it's becoming part of the mission, but women's mental health is a thing.
It is a thing, Courtney, and I think that's what I found in going through it. I am a big mental health advocate now, especially for moms, and for just everybody in general, right? That everybody
Mhm.
should have the resources and means to be able to be seen and heard and helped. But I would have never found that call in my life to go and make that such a part of my life to help others in that way had I not been open to putting out there what I had gone through. And like you said, there's so many times that we are supposed to look buttoned up, polished, have no issues. But honestly, the real connectivity in our world comes from the vulnerability and the openness that we can share with one another. And that is the only way that stigmas are going to change and people are going to get the help that they need, especially like you said, in women with postpartum, because that is something that just gets washed under the rug so frequently.
It's just mind baffling to me, and I just cannot ignore this topic because you suffered from postpartum. I've spoken with other
Mm-hmm.
women that had postpartum, other women that just have had debilitating depression and suicidal thoughts, and it's like I've dealt with it a lot of my life too. I'm on medication for it. I've gone through therapy, coaching.
Oh,
Like, this is like a bigger issue. And I know I'm kind of like, I feel almost like I'm beating a dead horse with this, but I don't think I am, because like we are really facing, like, I'm not kidding when I say every single woman, and I mainly talk to women on this show, has dealt with this, like in some way,
Oh,
shape, or form. And it's like, why are we faced with this? Is it like we are just like putting up this facade that everything is wonderful, and we are so afraid to break down and be real that like we internally are in such turmoil? Or like, is there something else that's causing this? Is it a disconnection from our spirit and faith? Or I don't know. What do you think?
I, I agree. And I think it's a couple of things. I think because I also severe postpartum anxiety, which goes undiagnosed most times, because if you don't fall in their screening of depression, they think you're
Yeah.
fine. But it was debilitating. I had panic attacks every morning. I couldn't get out of bed and take care of my new baby. Darkest days. And I think it's twofold. I think one, from like the healthcare side, we need better systems and processes in place with helping women as they move through that new chapter of becoming a mom. But to your point,
Mhm.
Courtney, I also think moms just have so many more spinning plates than they've ever had before,
Yeah.
especially post COVID, because post COVID, not only did you have a child or a child during that time, but there are ramifications for your children that you're trying to deal with. Like my 6-year-old now has like really bad anxiety, and then
Mm.
having to deal with your job and husband and spouse and event planner and vacation planner. It just is, the list is endless. And Courtney, I have to say, this really came to life for me when I did Eve Rotsky's Fair Play book, and my husband and I played the Fair Play game. And you
Mm.
take cards and you divvy out the cards of who does what in the relationship. And it's no dig on my
Uh-huh.
husband. I had 92 cards as a mom, Courtney, and my husband had like 33. And
Why?
because as a mom, I mean, it's even down to the small things we even don't realize are having a mental load on us. Taking, like, having to remind him to take out the trash, having to buy birthday presents for everyone's birthday, working on the holiday cards, right? Like, all of these small tasks add up to a very heavy mental load on top of the big roles that we fill as mom, friend, um, entrepreneur, etc. And so I think as women, we just have such an expectation on us of having to do it all versus being able to like ask for help. I think that's the biggest thing, because so many times we're raised and brought up to be like, no, you can handle it. This is everything that you're supposed to do. Oh, you're throwing entrepreneur on that. Well, you chose that path, so you have to deal with all of that on your own. And it's just not true.
I mean, but even when you have a husband, like you said, your husband helps. You're not, it's not a dig on him. My husband is hands on too. He's very hands on. But
Mm-hmm.
like there is a point where it's like I am overwhelmed sometimes. I am at a breaking point, and he'll like say, "How can I help?" And I
Yep.
can't even release anything to him, or I don't know, or it feels like that's even adding another layer of, okay, now I have to come up with an idea for you to help me so that you can feel good about helping me.
Yes.
And I could feel like you're taking something off my plate, but it actually feels like we're adding something more to it. Like, how do we actually get that help that we need?
I think it's, again, two sides. I think one of them is, especially, we need to start just showing up for people and helping them without even asking, right? Like, especially for new moms, everybody asks new moms, what do you need? How can I help? Just show up and deliver dinner. Just hire a house cleaner for them for a week. Like, just take the action off of them so they don't have to think of anything. And then I think the
Mm.
same comes into with relationships. I think, and that's a conversation I have with my husband when he used to ask me that all the time as well. I was like, honey,
Yeah.
it is more of a load for me for you to ask me what I need for help rather than just you doing things. And he's like, well, I don't know if it's a help or not. I was like, you just doing them and not asking me is 100 times better, because just
Mm.
things are getting done. And I don't have to have another moment of brain power that's already dividend to something else.
Mm. I mean, that is brilliant because, we are, whether you're an entrepreneur or just a stay-at-home mom, and I don't even want to say just a stay-at-home mom, being a stay-at-home mom, I've been it for a little while between, between my end of my COVID career and starting my business. I've had that and realized, that wasn't necessarily for me. I wanted a little bit more, but that is the hardest thing that we do,
It
being
is.
a mom. And I know people will say, well, that's a choice. You chose this. And I wanted to be a mom more than anything. Like, I did choose it, but that doesn't negate the fact that it is freaking hard.
It is so hard. And I think that is what, as women, we are starting to do a better job of supporting each other, right? Like taking the judgment out. And when we see a mom out who's just struggling, like I just bounce in to help, right? We were at Chick-fil-A and this poor mom had 4 kids and they were all having meltdowns. She was trying to get the food. And I popped over there. I was like, let me help you. I helped get the kids seated. I helped ran and got the food for her. Like that's what we need to be doing more of for each other, Courtney, is lifting each other up. Because like you said, when that saying, it takes a village to raise kids, it is not wrong. It takes all of us to give each other as moms a little bit of sanity back into our days. Because you're right, it is the hardest job. And I was like you, I chose to stay home. I had like a midlife crisis when my oldest was 18 months. I was working an insane job at that time. I never saw him. I felt like our nanny was raising him, and I just quit overnight. And quit overnight. I stayed home with him for about 9 months. Hardest thing I have ever done in my life, Courtney. Hardest. Loved him, but like you, I just needed a little bit of balance in another way. But I reflect back on that, Courtney. I was like, I shouldn't have had to be at the point where I had to choose and just ultimately quit everything, right? Because I was frizzled out in front of it.
Yeah. Well, what's wrong with the society that we are just completely, mom burnout is real. We work ourselves to the bone in so many different ways. Like, I don't think that's uncommon for people to just throw their hands up in the air and say, I'm done. I can't handle this. Like, we need to change things. And I think we need to usher in more female leaders, female voices. And that kind of comes even in through what you're doing through getting different authors out there, because we've been living in a male dominated culture for so long. And I'm not this uber feminist. I am not like rah, like women get like, I'm actually very traditional in certain ways, but like, I do think that we need to be led a little bit more with that feminine, with that divine feminine, with that softness and that clarity. That I feel like women are more thoughtful in our processes than men. Men are very ego driven, and this isn't against them, but like they've created this culture and we've only tried to excel in it, and it's not working. It's breaking down everywhere, from our careers to our homes to our family. Like everything is suffering for that. So how do we change the culture?
And I think that's such a great point. I think it starts on so many different levels. One, I think it starts with empowering women to know that they can ask for what they're worth, the raise, the money, right? The leadership role. I think that is the biggest thing as females to overcome, like, especially where I grew up, was you're very grateful for opportunities, right? You're very thankful to be there. That's not necessarily true. We have the same right to use our voice, and it doesn't make us because we have a voice. We just need to empower each other to ask for that raise, ask to be that VP, ask for it, right? We shouldn't even have to ask for it, but we do. And so I think we have got to get rid of that stigma of just being grateful for where we get to and be happy for that. And then I think as well, the more that we can do, like, we have it great on a national level. Like, you think of what Michelle Obama's doing with her platform, and Reese Witherspoon is doing to really grow women voices and producers all in that talent field. I think that now needs to trickle down to the corporate side. I think some corporations have done a wonderful job with that. And then there's still a lot of room for growth. And I think, like you said, to your point, it all comes down to vulnerability and to being open to that change and to those opportunities for women. And because it's different from what they know. And that's scary. But then so much change for the better, and women retention in the workforce will only skyrocket when it happens.
Well, I mean, and that's another big thing that we always talk about on the show is change. Change is so scary and
Mm-hmm.
people don't like to see change. So the
Mm-hmm.
more that we get to share our voices, the more that makes others, I think, hold on, the
Yeah.
powers that be, whoever it is, that hold on, and then it becomes this battle, where it doesn't need to be. I think there's a place for everyone. I think there's a place for the masculine, and there's a place for the feminine. And when we come together, we can create such a better space, as opposed to this, like,
Yes.
this change as women, or as we get more opportunities to speak our voice. you know I feel right now it's received with a lot of tension because people are holding the power, like I said, the powers that be, whoever is making these decisions, hold on for dear life because they don't want to lose that power and change.
I love that you brought this up, Courtney, because I think you're right. We are very resistant to change, but also we are sometimes all afraid to hold on to power. But what we don't realize is we don't really have the power. Life has the power.
Mm.
Like, we may think that we are in charge of X, Y, and Z, and we manage 5,000 people, and we're CEO of this big company, and we are in charge. Life happens to all of us. Life is going to direct us in its direction, that where you want to go. If you're someone of faith, God, that's God, right? If you're someone who believes in the universe, that, nothing's in our control. So I love that you brought up the power aspect, because it's such a false sense of safety, thinking that we have power in what we are doing. We have power in our work of making change, but power of control is just a false reality, because we ultimately are in control of what's going to happen next and where life is going to take us next. We can help influence it, yes. And like you said, for women leaders, absolutely influence it. But I think the leadership has to see at the end of the day that power that they're so scared of letting go actually wasn't there in the first place.
That is probably one of the most insightful things. Yes, we are not in control. There is a bigger plan. I don't care who you are. Like you said, I don't care what you call it, whether it's God,
Yeah.
universe, whatever. It's all in the same thing. It's all the same concept, that we are all here to have an experience, and things are out of our control. Look what happened
Mm-hmm.
when COVID hit. I mean, look at everything that changed. No one had, people tried to pull strings and gain power, and yes, some people had some sort of power over the scenario, but we did, on a individual level, we lost control. Like, things were out of our control. And that's where we need to learn to get vulnerable, let go of our fear, and understand that we can
Yes.
only show up and really play our part, but know that life is going to happen. There is something bigger at us than us, at work through us. And I think that's, I mean, definitely one of the powers that we can find in telling our story and sharing that, is realizing that, there is something bigger that's connecting all of us.
Exactly, exactly. And to your point, it's not that we're fearful of what's to come because we don't have control. Like, I don't want anybody to sit here and be like, oh my gosh, okay, so I'm not in control. I don't know what that means. I don't know what the future is going to bring. We don't hide from it, because wonderful things come into our lives. Babies, new friends, new jobs, right? You move, wonderful things, as well as things uncontrollable. I mean, we can't control death. We can't control most of the sicknesses. We can't, we can help be preventative, but we can't control that ultimately. And so you truly just want to live your life with intention every day. Not fear, not the scarcity mindset, but just intentional in your life. And that starts with vulnerability, right? Like, okay, if I am given this day, who can I help with my story? And what change can I make in this world for today?
I love this concept of using vulnerability in the idea of surrender, because that's essentially what we're talking about, is surrendering
Yes.
to the bigger picture. We're talking about surrendering to whatever is going to come into our life, and God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. really truly only wants the best things for us. So, I mean, even
Yes.
in the hard times, I don't know one person that has gone through a hard time that looks back at it and says that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Usually people will say that was the best thing
It's
that
the
ever happened to
best.
me, even if it was horrible in the time, because it put you on the path to where you needed to go. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where that vulnerability to allow comes in. And I think maybe that is the key to surrender, because surrender is talked about a lot, especially in a self-help and spiritual space. And I
Yes.
always come
Yes, it
back to
is.
it. I've been studying, I've been mentored, I've been in this space for quite a while now, and I still struggle with that idea of surrender. I'm like, but how? How do I surrender? You know, I think getting vulnerable is a huge part of that.
It is, because to surrender means that you are open to growth. And
Mm.
surrendering means that it's not that, again, it's not that you're losing power, because none of us had it in the first place. It means that when we surrender, we're like, okay, I'm giving it all up in the air. I am looking inward, and I'm truly just going to listen when life is telling me something. And when you
Mm.
surrender, you are able to have that quiet space. And I'm not saying a voice is going to talk to you. I'm going to say you're going to see certain things like happen multiple times in your life, and so if you believe in signs, or somebody reaches out with an opportunity that you haven't talked to in years, right, that you never would have had. Surrendering just literally takes this weight off and opens you up to anything that might come your way.
Mm. So you're making space for
Mm-hmm.
miracles to happen in your life, essentially.
Absolutely. I mean, especially when all of us are in that dating and relationship phase, how many times were you dating somebody and then you had like multiple people interested
Mm.
in you, right? Or you're dating somebody and the guy or girl you really wanted interested in you was then interested in you. And it's kind of like the laws of attraction. And the same is true in this
Mhm.
situation where you've got to surrender to be able to attract the things that you do want in your life. But you've got to be vulnerable to do them and say, okay, I'm open to whatever comes.
So what you're really talking about is that, we have all this power, this so-called power that we're talking about that we don't have, but we do because we have it within. We have all the answers within. And I know you've spoken about this, and you talk about the whole concept of like looking for the answers outside of us, and seeking out this guru or this book, which I know which is a space we're both very involved in. But you're not going to get all that. You're not going to get. Here I am. You're a book publicist. I'm a writer saying don't buy the books because that's not where you're going to get the answers. Yes, those books are mapped to yourself to give you the answers, but we really truly need to come back within because we all have the answers ourselves.
Absolutely. And this is what I love talking about. Like, yes, we are in a society now where like personal development and personal growth is $1 billion industry. And it's not to
Mm-hmm.
say that it cannot have some type of effect on you, but what it is not going to do, you can spend tens of thousands of dollars on every event and course and book out there. If you are not ready for any of the change and you haven't done the work internally yourself, none of that is going to be able to be applied to your life. And so basically, it's washing money down the drain, because there is no one that knows more about you than you. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
knows what those hardships, what those pain points, what your goals are, what your opportunities are. And you've got to spend some time to do some self-love therapy. And I'm not saying you have to pay for a therapist, but you got to just spend some time with yourself, moving through and getting very clear on what you want. Then you are a guru of yourself. You're like, okay, I'm very clear on how I'm going to be vulnerable with my story, what I'm going to share in it, what I want to do with it. And then all those tools, the books, courses, and events can help be simply that, tools to help you. But anytime we look to somebody else to fully solve our problems, that's where the kind of wheels fall off the bus, because no one person is going to have every answer that you could ever need to make that change in your life. That really just starts with you. So going into this mindset of like, I'm going to hire a guru to fix all my problems, well, that's just not true. And it's not going to happen, because if you aren't ready to address the problem yourself, there's no change that can be made. So that is why I always say, and like you said, Courtney, I've been in personal development for over 15 years with my job, and I've seen wonderful transformations happen with individuals. However, it started with them finding their own confidence and their own story and their own goals, and then use personal development to help amplify and scale what they want to do.
Exactly. I talk about this in the fact of it's kind of like if you have an addiction problem. No one can put you in rehab. No one can force you to get the help that you need. You have to want it. Yes, you might succeed for 30 days, 60 days in that program. Like you might, but if you don't have it within you to make that change, it's not going to happen. So we can't force these ideas or these concepts of growth down people's throats. You have to want it, and you have to go within to do the work, and then use the books and use the courses and use the events to help guide you and use them as a map along your way. But you really have to get vulnerable with yourself, because I know you said that who knows you best other than you? I would argue some of us don't even know ourselves. So we need to take the time to get to know ourselves.
It's so true. It is so true. And that's the hardest thing. It's so much easier to look outwardly for solutions. And that's why we pay so much for someone else to tell us what to do, because we're scared of just trusting our own thought and intuition. You were made beautifully, you, with your own thoughts, your own intuition. And yes, you might need education and tools and resources, but no one knows that gut check better than you. And we've got to stop being afraid of just not going through with it. The worst thing that's going to happen, listen, I've had things that have failed in my life. We all have things that have failed in our lives. The worst thing that's going to do is you will fail, and at some point in your life. However, you then build up the confidence to be like, too bad. The world didn't end. I still have my health. Things are still okay. Okay, let's try this again. And you learn something from that. And I know everyone's like, that's easy to say. No, I have failed at businesses. I had a business right out of college. I thought it was a genius business plan. I had it for 2 years. The recession hit, and now I went up in smoke. I had another business. And Courtney, you'll appreciate this, with a dear friend of mine. It was a digital course business for moms returning to the workforce. It was called Modern Maternity Leave. We had everything. We were going to launch 1 week, the last week of March, 1 week before April, and COVID hit. And everybody's returning to the workforce, Courtney. We spent 2 years building this product, and it like literally 2 years, and it went up in smoke. And so that's what I say, guys, like, you will fail, but it is giving me the confidence to find my passion and purpose with what I'm doing today, and trusting my gut in getting here. And I think that's what we have to do ultimately, is listen to that inner self.
I mean, talk about things being out of your control, thinking you have the power, thinking you're going to control this great plan, this great idea, and then just the world happens. Things happen in the world. Yeah, a lot of things were able to pivot at that time, but how do you pivot going back into the workforce in that space? So, oh my goodness. But do you think it's about getting vulnerable with yourself, or do you think it's that we're afraid to take responsibility for ourselves and our life and our actions? Because if we get vulnerable and start to recognize who we truly are, and we don't look without us, that means that we're going to take ownership of our life, of the trajectory of our choices.
Yes, we've got to be okay with I'm sorry and apologizing and addressing the things that we didn't do the best, or that we weren't the nicest at, or people that we hurt along the way. And that's fine. None of us want to own up to being like folks that make mistakes, but we all do. We're human. And I mean, I had that personal experience when I went through the darkest days, where you said the darkest days are usually the biggest place for growth. That was my postpartum. Yeah. And I realized how I was not showing up with one of the relationships in my family the way that I should have been for years. And I had to go through very painful conversation with this individual, to be able to work through it, to then have the beautiful relationship we have today. But I had to say, like, gosh, I was not right. I was mean. I was out of line. And that is the hardest thing. But once you do it the first time and you realize, like, owning the mistake and owning it lets you move away from it. Otherwise, you continue to carry it. Because I did. I continued to carry this burden I didn't even realize until I addressed it. And so there's so much power in being able to own it, address it, be sincere about it, and learn from it, and then be able to let it go.
I mean, we're hitting all the different points of like what is taught in every spiritual, every self-help book: getting vulnerable, finding courage, owning your shit, and letting it go. And is that the key to letting go, is owning it, speaking it out loud, and then you find that freedom of whatever words are on you or whatever energy you're carrying on? Is that the secret to letting go, is to actually speak it and address it?
I believe so, because there's something that is taught, and especially when I went to therapy for my postpartum, that not only speaking it, but writing it down. There are plenty of scientific studies out there that show that what happens between the brain and heart connection of when you write something down. And so what my therapist had me do, and I still do it to this day, I wrote a letter to this individual first. And I wrote a letter apologizing, addressing, and everything. That's what made me let it go even before the conversation, Courtney, because I didn't know how the conversation was go. They could be not accepting. They could not have wanted to continue the relationship, etc. But I knew I had my piece in writing it down and getting it out of my head and heart onto paper. And you don't have to share it with anybody. But that process is what gave me the signal between the heart and the brain, and being able to be like, okay, it's out of you, and you have worked through the process of penning it, and now it's not a part of you. It's a part of your story, but it's not who you are moving forward.
That's why I talk so much about journaling being such a huge part of getting to know yourself, moving energy. If you're dealing with something, writing it down, bringing your head and your heart together. And I've actually learned that your hands are the gateway to your heart. So your hands and
That's
heart.
That's a beautiful way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fact that you're like physically writing it down, and I always suggest like a pen and paper, writing it down, not typing it. There's something different that happens when you move that energy through the pen onto the page and you see it written in front of you.
It's so true.
Changes everything.
It does. It changes everything. And because you are actually having to sit there and take the time to think about every little word you're putting on that paper. Because sometimes when we type, it's like muscle memory, right? And we're just going. When you are writing it, you are being very open and raw to everything on that paper. And I think that's where the power comes into being able to move through it, because you're slowing down. Like writing forces you to slow down, and it forces your brain to slow down. And then the two can catch up together to be able to truly let it go and move on. And it's not to say let it go if something bad has happened to you. And it's not to say like that won't ever be a part of your story, but it won't ever be a part of the weight that you carry anymore. I mean, the greatest example that we all know is Ebenezer Scrooge, right? And all the chains he had to carry for the wrongs that he did in his past. And that is like everything that we have done wrong in our past. And it's not to say you need to go up to find every individual in your life and apologize for anything wrong. If there's heavy ones that subconsciously keep coming back to you, those are the ones to address.
It's like a 12-step program for self-help. Go find everyone in your past that you've wronged and apologize.
And like, oh my gosh, when we're all teenagers, like goodness help us, how many of those people would be?
Oh my God. All I can say is thank God that I did not have social media, that we did not have social media when we were teenagers, because I feel for kids today. But so would you suggest for writers, since I know you do work with writers and you work with people that are trying to get vulnerable, that journaling, that handwriting, because I mean, I don't think it's realistic to say, write your whole book freehand. how magical would that be? I mean, think of all the great books in the world. Most of those are written probably freehand from very, very olden days. But like, would you suggest that that's like the place to start, the place to get vulnerable?
Absolutely. What I tell anybody who wants to get into writing or writing a book is always carry a notepad or a journal with you. Your most genius ideas typically are not going to come from when you're sitting behind a desk. It's going to be when you're walking and moving, or in your favorite place, or at a coffee shop, whatever. Those writing of ideas, Courtney, are where a book comes to life. And almost every successful author will tell you that they have some type of like pamphlet and paper and pen to just any brainstorm idea. You're like, ooh, that could make a great chapter 3. And you write that down. That's how really good books are conceptualized, because it's kind of like that. They say entrepreneurship is not a linear path. Writing a book's not a linear path. Typically, most people cannot write a book. Okay, here are my table of contents. I'm going straight from chapter 1 to chapter 12. Most of the time, it's like, oh, I'm going to put this in chapter 3. Oh, that's a great idea for chapter 5. And it's all over the place. And that's where writing really helps you organize those thoughts. Then when your thoughts are organized, typing is a beautiful way to quickly pull it all together.
I mean, that is exactly what happens. Anything I've written that has been so well received, whether it's for TV or a speech or anything, has been not behind the computer. It's usually like in the bathtub, in the shower.
Yep.
Like I remember when I wrote the speech for my maid of honor speech for my sister's wedding. Literally, I was sitting in the bath. I jumped up, got an envelope and a pencil, and wrote it down. And it was like 2 minutes. It was like that divine download that just came in, and it was so well received, and it was great. But even I used to, live in San Diego and work in LA in television, and that drive, it was almost like meditative. It was a long drive. I can't even tell you how many times I'm sitting in traffic writing down some of my best ideas. It's just kind of like getting out of your way. You're not going to sit down and just get vulnerable. You have to allow it to come through you.
You do. And I've had that same experience several times. I run every morning, and my best ideas come on my run in the morning, because there's nothing else I'm thinking about. Like, that is the only time my brain is not very focused on the tactical side of what I need to execute on. Like, it can just be. And that is where so many like company ideas have come from, speeches have come from. And my children's book that I'm working on came from a train ride. We had a 2-hour train ride in Colorado, and I wrote the entire book on the train, because that was just my space of inspiration. And so it's like, you can search for it and find the like nooks and crannies that make you feel inspired, but also be very open to whenever it does come to you. Like you said, like in the most random times, even a shower.
I mean, we were just talking about the whole idea that not actually using pen and paper to write a book, that it might not actually be realistic, but you did.
Oh, absolutely. The whole thing was written on paper. And of course, like, I had to type it and put it into a doc so editors could edit it. But the whole idea came in exactly pen to paper, and it was a beautiful way to really be intentional with my words of this story that I'm working on, because again, it made me slow down and really think of the story I was trying to tell.
But isn't that true when you're actually physically writing? How much more intentional you can get with your words, because I feel like there is so much more thought that goes into what you're writing with a pen on a paper than what you're typing. Because like, to your point, you said typing is almost muscle memory sometimes. So it's like we lose a little bit of that authenticity in our writing when we're typing versus when we're writing.
We do. And I think, especially in our lines of work of being very creative, it's really important for us to have that time. Like you talked about journaling, or for me, it's at the end of the day is kind of where I can find my peace. Because if I do it in the morning, I always feel like I'm like mentally rushed. And I just take 5 minutes a day. I tried one of these practices which said like journal 2 hours every morning, and that just was unrealistic to me. So I felt like I failed if I couldn't do 2 hours. And so I have found peace. If it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. If I have 15 minutes, that's great. And I'm just happy to have that time, no matter the length of time that it is.
Well, I think that's super important to just make it yours, because I know for me, when I started really being diligent about my journaling, I was trying to follow Julia Cameron's morning pages and, to get up and write. Well, I have 2 kids. I'm busy. Like, the mornings are hectic. It's not a good time for me to sit down and write. It's at the end of my day that
Same.
I find that time. So I'll write my 3 morning pages at night. And to me, that just gives me so much relief. It allows me to put everything out on the page, talk about letting go. It allows you to let go and go to sleep in a way that you can get that reset, as opposed to ruminating. And I deal with rumination, dealing with ruminating thoughts throughout your head as you're trying to fall asleep. It just it helps you with that let go and that surrender.
It does. And I have a dear friend, his name is Tristan Ahumada, and he has a wind down routine, like end of day routine. And I love it. I live by it. It just helps me be able to check mark all the cylinders, turn them all off, and really be able to have a space of peace, because I was having a hard time sleeping and just being able to get in a calm state at night. And you're right. Like, having a solid evening routine is critical to how you show up the next day.
Well, even if you can allow yourself to clear your mind at night, it kind of goes back to the concept that we were talking about of opening up space for things to come into your life. Because I know, and once again, we're bringing everything together here, having a pen and paper by your bedside. I cannot tell you how many times ideas, as in that state when you're just about to fall asleep, have popped into my head, and I've jumped up to write it down, scribble it in a journal or scribble it on a piece of paper next to me.
Yes.
You won't remember it. You will forget it. But sometimes that's your most brilliant downloads come in that state between falling asleep and settling in. And if you open yourself and give yourself the space for it to come, you don't know what magic's going to pop in.
No, I love that you touched on that, because I heard about this first from someone else in this space. And he was telling me, he was like, no, there's a wonderful book about it. It's that twilight space between falling asleep and sleep. And studies have shown how your brain is actually in the most creative space at that time. And those are where the incubation of change maker ideas come from. So I love that you brought that up, because I'm a full believer kind of in that period of time between fully asleep and fully awake is such a gem of ideas.
Yeah. Well, maybe if you're dealing with writer's block or something, you go take a nap, because it's that. I don't think it has to be at nighttime. It's that state. And I've even actually heard of some of the big inventors of our past have done that. They would go and take naps if they wanted to come up with a solution to whatever they were working on, or all those things, because like you said, there's science backed by the fact of that twilight space. So what a great way to unblock yourself. Well, Paige, thank you so much for joining me today. I know we've had some technical difficulties, like we were talking about earlier, how life just happens and we have no control. This podcast has kind of gone off the rails for me, because it's we kind of lost power there in the middle of it, trying to bring everything back up on. But I truly appreciate you taking your time to talk to me today, and all of your beautiful insight, and getting vulnerable and sharing your story of the troubles that you're not even troubles, your challenge with the postpartum depression and everything that you faced. And so I really am honored, and thank you so much for joining me today. Oh, I forgot to ask you, in all the hubbub, I forgot to ask you, how can we follow along with you and your journey?
Okay, so a couple ways. I give a ton of free advice and tips and tricks on my Instagram at the Paige Dungan. And then if any of you are interested in writing a book, I've got a great newsletter that you can find at my website, thefrontporchcollective.co. No M on there, just .co.
Thank you, Paige. I'm going to put all that information in the show notes. I'm going to fix this episode the best I can, so hopefully it makes sense when we play it back for everyone to listen. I am so sorry for...
Great.
for all of our technical issues, but I truly appreciate having you here today. Thank you so much.
Courtney, thank you. It has been such a joy. Thank you for having me.
And that's it for today's very unpredictable, intentional living with Courtney Myers. I know Paige and I were talking all about how things are out of our control, and this podcast was out of our control with power outages, technical difficulties, and all the good stuff. But thank you so much, Paige Dungan, for joining me in such a great conversation all about getting vulnerable and showing up as who we are so that we can truly connect with one another. And thank you for sharing her story. If you want to work with Paige and follow along with all that she's doing, I'll put all the information of how to get in touch with her in the show notes below. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Myers and Intentional Media on my website at CourtneyMyers.com. That's where you'll find books, courses, and everything else we have coming up. I can't wait to talk to you again. Bye.